We have over 300 people registered for this training course. So it may not be possible for all of you to speak on this platform, but I encourage you to use the chat function to ask questions. There is a little bubble icon on the top. If you click that, a chat window will open on the right side, which you can use to put in your questions or comments. Today's training course on UNFC and UNRMS is also a curtain raiser to the big event next week, the UNECE Resource Management Week 2021. We have 5 days of exciting sessions on different aspects of UNFC and UNRMS, applications, case studies, experiences from different countries showcased in the sessions next week. We expect to see all of you there. And if you have not registered for the event, please do that now. A link will be available in the chat window. We have the agenda in 2 parts. We hope to have this initial presentation finished in 45 minutes, and that will leave us 15 minutes for questions and discussions. In the presentation, the first part will be on UNFC explained, and second part will be on UNFC and UNRMS applications. A fleeting glance of UNRMS will be offered. Today's presenters are 2 distinguished experts of UNFC and UNRMS. So we have Mr. Sigurd Heiberg, Chairman of Petronavit AS. Sigurd is a past chairman of the Bureau of Expert Group on Resource Classification, which is now the Expert Group on Resource Management, and the chair of the Intergovernmental Committee on Sustainable Energy. Sigurd is also a member of the Expert Group on Resource Management and also works in several working groups of the EGRM. The second presenter is Mr. Per Blestad, Resource Management, Petronavit AS. Per is a past leader of the Petroleum Working Group of the Expert Group and has served in several task forces of this expert group. Currently, he is a member of EGRM and also works in the EGRM Communications Working Group. With that, I will hand over the floor to Per to take this forward. Over to you, Per.
Thank you for this introduction, Hari, and to all of you, good morning, good evening, good day, good night. I see it's from all over the world, so the time zones are very different. And also big thanks to Charlotte and to you, Hari, for the support to set up this meeting. So I'd like to start with this picture because this reminds us about our challenges and mandate. The Paris Agreement on climate change mitigation is charging the nations and citizens with a mandate to do the utmost to reduce the adverse effect of climate changes and to work together to a sustained future. Also, the member states of the United Nations has adopted the 17 goals for sustainable development, which you have seen many times, I guess. And they have set the 2030 agenda for reaching them. But we know that none of these goals can be attained without massive amounts of energy and raw materials, which may have negative or will have negative effects on the environment and the climate. So we need to find clever ways to manage the resources sustainable. And the United Nations Framework Classification for Resources, the UNFC, can help us with that. So here it is. Some of you are familiar with it, I guess. some are new. So let's just look at the principles and how it works. So we go the tour through this. Well, there are some fundamental criteria. These are UNFC is a principle-based classification system for resource projects, and relies on these three fundamental criteria. First is the environmental socio-economic viability, we might call the E. Then the technical feasibility of the project to develop resources, and also the level of confidence in the estimates of these resources. Together, this creates this three-dimensional system. So we have the criteria, but they are divided into categories, and we are helped by a numerical coding system which is established, and each criteria is subdivided into categories. So they will fall out here: the environmental socio-economic viability, E1, E2, E3, the technical feasibility, F1, F2, F3, F4, and the degree of confidence in the estimates, the G1, G2, G3, and G4. So let's have a quick look at the definitions, not going in details, but just so you can see the system and the principles. First, we have the first set of elements here, which are the E-axis. This is designates the degree of favorability of environmental socio-economic conditions in establishing the viability of a project. And this will include consideration of market prices, relevant legal, regulatory, social, environmental, and contractual conditions. So here are the definitions. E1, being the most mature, says that development and operation are confirmed to be environmentally, socially, economically viable. A terrible word is, but it captures a lot. And E2 says development and operation are expected to become environmentally, socially, economically viable in the foreseeable future. And less mature, the development and operations, this is for E3, development operations are not expected to become environmentally, socially, economically viable in the foreseeable future, or evaluation is at too early stage to determine this viability. So this is the first one, the E axis. Then we have the F axis. This is designating the maturity of technology and studies and commitments which are necessary to implement the project. And these range from the early conceptual studies down here through a fully developed through fully developed projects going through the value chain. So the top level, we have the F1, technical feasibility of development project has been confirmed. It may actually also produce the resources. Then the F2, technical feasibility of a development project is subject to further evaluation. So there are contingency which has to be solved. More information, more studies has to be done before a decision can be taken. And we have F3, the technical feasibility of a development project cannot be evaluated due to limited technical data. For instance, a new discovery in petroleum or a project which is just started, we have not enough information about it to see if it's really technical feasibility. And then at last we have F4, where no development project has been identified. Now all this comes with the estimates for the outcome of this project. And we have the G-axis, which is the level of confidence. So we have the G1, which is the product quantity associated with the project that can be estimated with a high level of confidence. And further down, the G2 with a moderate level, G3 with a low level of confidence. And G4 is associated with prospective projects, which are estimated primarily on indirect evidence. Yeah, I'd like to bring up this just to show the structure of the definitions. This is E1 definition, in very clear language. Development and operation are confirmed to be environmentally, socially, economically viable. Full stop. Well, it's to give you more information what this really means. We have the supporting explanation, which go more into details, and this goes for all of the category definitions. So it comes very handy when you are going to classify a project. You will need also to look at the supporting explanation to hit the right level. So let's see how this system works. Well, the category definitions are the building blocks of the system. So the challenge is to select the correct category for each of the three criteria, the E, F, and G. So when these are found, you combine them in this order, E, F, G, and they will form a class or classes. Let's just see how this will fall out for a project. We consider that we have a resource project where development and operations are confirmed to be environmentally, socially, economically viable. It could be a producing oil field or a producing mine. Well, this fits the E1 definition. Development and operation are confirmed to be environmentally, socially viable. So on the E-axis, we will be on the top level here, E1. Further, it's a product which is producing, it's a project which is producing a product. So it fits the definition of F1. Technical feasibility of a development project has been confirmed. So it will be on the F-axis, it will be on the top level here, F1. Then we have the estimate of the quantity associated with the project, which is on the high level of confidence. So we are here on the G-axis on G1. That brings us up to this position here. So we have the class of E1, F1, G1. But if we always quote these numbers in the same fashion, the E, F, G, alphabetical order, we can just skip the letters E, F, and G. So this designates the UNFC class 111. And you can see the numbering here on top of it. 111, 112, 113. So let's just have a closer look on the classification system, which is shown here in this expanded view on the E-axis. There are no constraints on the combination of the E, F, and G categories and subcategories, but some may be more useful than others, and they are shown by the primary classes, which are shown here with a different color coding for clarity. So on top here, we have the viable project. These are the green boxes here. They require that you have both E1 and F1. They will always be on this row here. So yeah, and then the next one are the potential viable projects. They will be shown here in the orange boxes by the E2 and F2 position, and for the range G1, G2, G3, whatever you have here. But in some cases, the potentially viable project here may satisfy the definition of the E1. So then you will have the orange boxes up here on this level. Non-viable projects are shown here in the red boxes. This includes projects that are at an early stage of evaluation, for instance, a new discovery, and in addition to those which are considered unlikely to become viable in the foreseeable future within 4 or 5 years, and also as well as production from project ongoing here, but which is not sold, it's or consumed in operation. That would be classified down here. The prospective projects is a dark blue box over here, and in petroleum industry that would be undrilled projects or prospects, and here the light blue boxes show the remaining products that are not developed from identified project. They may become developed in the future as technology or environmental or socioeconomic conditions will change. For petroleum, this is what is left in the reservoir, and it holds the potential for improved recovery. Now, these transparent boxes here, the glass boxes, can be used, but sometimes it's not meaningful to use that, but there are no constraints on using it. Outside this main system, we have the pink boxes here. On the top, we have what is sold and used production coming from the projects here at the E1, F1 level. And at the bottom here, we have production which is unused, which is consumed in operations. As an example from petroleum, this would be the fuel and flare. It would be handy to have a place to put these numbers. Of course, we are talking about estimates of products, and they always come with some uncertainty. This is captured on the degree of confidence axis, the g-axis. And the uncertainty is communicated either, it could be by discrete quantities, like G1 being high confidence, moderate and low confidence, or by generating 3 specific scenarios where the outcome is low, best, and high. Being low G1, best G1 plus G2, and high G1 plus G2 plus G3. And the quantities may be estimated using deterministic or probabilistic methods. We're going from this 3D expression of the system, which it comes to, you could see here, you could travel through the system, mature these prospects, make discoveries, mature it up the chain, and finally produce it here. For practical purposes, sometimes the 2D version, the table version of this system is more useful, and it's shown here. Here we have the classes, the viable project, potentially viable project, non-viable project, and prospective projects. And here are the axes, the E-axis shown in this column, the F-axis in this column, and the G-axis here. We're going from a 3D system to a 2D system. We lose some granularity, and this is marked here by this asterisk, saying that potentially viable project may satisfy the requirement of E1 going up here. But this is a simple way of putting it. Also, you could have subclasses based upon subcategories. This is an example of that. And this is, if you're talking about project management, this will be the way that you will treat this. For instance, the viable projects here on top would be divided into the subclasses on production, approved for development, justified for development. And these classes are defined from the E1 position, but the feasibility axis is subdivided into 1.1 and 1.1.2, and 113, saying that 111 is production is currently taking place. 112 is the capital funds have been committed and implemented, or the development is underway, and F13 studies have been completed to demonstrate technical feasibility. So this is the way how we can build up the subclasses of the system. All these definitions of the categories and subcategories are found in the classification document. Now this is a picture which I think captures some of the essence of the UNFC. We have the UNFC here in the center, and this has been designed to meet the needs for application pertaining to 4 main sectors. It's the policy formulation based on resource studies. It's the resource management function for governments, for nations, for corporate business processes. It's outside here. And the capital allocation for the financial part of it. The unique property of UNFC being centered on classifying projects gives us also the ability to use the generic classification for any kind of resource project that you can design. So since the UNFC was first developed in the 1990s, first for solid fuels, also coal and minerals, petroleum has been included, underground storage of CO2 gas for geological storage, then renewable energy of different kind. It's the solar, wind, geothermal, hydromarine, bioenergy. We have nuclear fuels, we have water, and we have anthropogenic resources, very important in the circular economy. Just a few words on the structure of the system. We have the definitions. They make the framework of the classification. But to know how we are going to use the classification, we need application rules. Those are the specifications, and they will change with the resources, because the resources are a bit different, and you need to have some clarification on this. And then then you have the non-mandatory guidance, the guidelines for how to use the system. Just a few words about the specifications. They have been developed because we have different resources, and the last years there has been developed generic specifications from the system itself, the UNFC system, and also a specification for renewable energy, geothermal energy, solar energy, wind, injection projects, bioenergy, and anthropogenic resources. Now this year, in the upcoming meeting next week, there will be discussion on draft the UNFC supplemental specification for petroleum, minerals, nuclear project, and groundwater. So this is a process in the making. The work is ongoing. I will advise you to go to the homepage of the UNECE, the Sustainable Energy, and look up for Sustainable Resource Management. Here you will find a lot of information, useful information. If you have some specific resource that you are working on, I guess you will find information about that, because you will find case studies for almost all resources covered by the UNFC, their specification. There are bridging documents between UNFC and other international and national classifications, because UNFC is a classification on its own, but it's also a framework classification. If you can map your own classification into the UNFC and develop a bridging document telling how this is going to be done. You will be in aligned classification with UNFC. So there's a lot of information there. You will also find guidelines of different topics. It's a definition of projects, a social and environmental consideration, competent person, evaluated classification, etc. All this has been produced through many years of devoted work from different stakeholders. They have been taking actively part in developing the UNFC through a unique, inclusive, impartial, and transparent process. So please join us in this process because we need the support from the whole world. So now, for the application of the UNFC and the UNRMS, I will leave the floor to Sigurd. Thank you. I give you the control, Sigurd.
You are muted.
Thank you, Per, and thank you for your excellent presentation of the fundamentals of the UNFC. We will now proceed to the applications, and I may not have control. Let me see. No, there.
Do you have control, Sigurd?
I have control, and we're turning to the applications of the UNFC in resource management for sustainable development. We foresee clearly a period of strong and strongly dynamic changes in the physical economy in the near term. This was reflected by the high-level statement that the member states of the UNEC adopted yesterday at their biannual meeting of the Commission, and it will be further emphasized at EGRM 12 next week. As Per explained, the UNFC is built to serve the functions of international policy making, government resource management, corporate business processes, and capital allocation, and it does so for anthropogenic resources central to the circular economy, to coal with its environmental issues, minerals including nuclear sources, petroleum, oil, gas, renewable energy such as biogenic, geothermal, solar, and wind, underground storage, and groundwater. In the context of sustainable development, these and other projects are clearly interlinked. That is why it is so useful to have one tool, the UNFC, to use for all of them. I shall present the applications through a lens where framework conditions are set to achieve common goals. They need to be set to allow industries to adapt and deploy their absolute best capability, and capabilities is what the industry delivers, and they need to do so in ways that the capital markets can finance within their proper constraints. This forms the essential and special public-private partnership that is supported by the UNFC and that you see on the screen. We begin by considering how projects are managed. It is convenient then to reduce the UNFC to the EF presentation for this purpose. And you see the cube at the top. We are now looking at the E-axis and the F-axis. The metrics are in each of these boxes, but the G-axis is not shown here. You have seen how project maturity is recorded by use of the E categories with respect to environmental, social, and economic acceptance from early discussions to full acceptance. You have also seen how projects are advanced physically from early exploratory efforts to decommissioning. When all approvals are in place and developments are done, the projects are ready to produce. Sorry. So you see them then in the E1 F1 axis that Per pointed to. Traditionally, the metrics and the confidence in the numbers have been quantities of sources and products recorded using the G-axis, as Per explained. This information remains important. It is, however, not the only information that projects carry and that is of importance in resource management. You will recognize other information such as production schedules, costs, revenues, emissions, values, taxes, human resources, other critical inputs, demands on limited infrastructure capacity, etc. Some of the information is in the form of scalars, while other information is in the form of vectors, that is, time series. I will revert to this shortly, but first a few words about managing activities along the E and F axis in concert. Clearly, it gives no great satisfaction to excel at developing a project physically, only to find out that it is not required. Advancing projects wisely on the E and the F categories in concert can avoid this. Here the public-private partnership mentioned comes into play. It is of particular interest to watch projects in the E2 categories and to examine whether they are wanted or not. If they are important enough, then there is a case for examining the framework conditions, the industry capabilities, and the capital allocation options to see what can be done to achieve a wanted result. The next slide, this slide, is taken from a case study presented to EGRM 11 last year. It shows how a project was advanced through substantial investment to a stage where approval and then to a stage of approval, and then subsequently was impaired by a decision to use the land for other purposes. You see here how it started, E3, E2, E3, then approval, E1, E2, E1, E2, 2, and then back to E3 where it's finally impaired. This example is not a unique situation. It has happened elsewhere, and it is quite unfortunate. The costs incurred by the private sector was certainly a loss to the company involved, who then expensed them. This became a loss to the public side as well through a reduction in taxable income. This is not, as I mentioned, the only case where unfortunate movements on the E-axis reflect losses to the full public-private partnership, but one that illustrates the importance of wise management along both the E and the F axis, and to do so at the right time. I move now to a slide that presents the E and the F matrix differently. Here you see each of the classes in this matrix listed on the vertical axis and again listed on the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, you will enter the projects or the metrics of interest to you as they are at the beginning of a period. You will then distribute them on the horizontal row as input to the class in which they are at the end of the period and aggregate the columns to obtain the full balance at the end of the period. In this way, you will be able to present the inventory at the beginning and at the end of the period, which you otherwise often do. The advantage here is that you at the same time will be able to show how the changes occurred. With the most mature classes at the top of the vertical axis and at the left of the horizontal axis, the projects or quantities that have been enhanced will plot below the diagonal. The unchanged projects will remain on the diagonal, and the impaired ones will appear above the diagonal. The exercise need not be limited to expose changes over a period. It can also be done to expose estimated changes that could be expected to occur, for instance, as a result of change in the policy envelopes, be it market, regulations, laws, infrastructure, and so on. This takes us over to a UN Resource Management Framework application. The UNRMS needs to respond to several needs. It is not the place here to go into all of them. Some are shown on the slide, and there will be a further and deeper discussion next week. You see here, the UNRMS extends the UNFC for securing affordable and sustainable energy and raw material services. Considerations are, of course, stocks and flows in both the physical and monetary economy. It is metrics for projects, asset holders, local entities, jurisdictions, and transnational entities that is aggregated at these levels. It is the effect of alternative policies, and it helps international sustainability reporting standards. That all of these aspects will come clear next week. In the context of this course, let us go back to the matrix that I just showed and see how the UNFC may help meet some of the needs of the UNRMS. Clearly, the matrix in itself is a great help in resource management for sustainable development, as we already saw. In the circular economy and in dealing with anthropogenic resources, outputs from one project will provide inputs to another. We now add project B to the screen. The horizontal arrow here signals how quantities from one project in one class will provide input in full or in parts to another project in the relevant class of that project, or vice versa. The classic example is where waste from one project becomes resource for another. It may also be used to reflect different outputs and inputs, such as human resources completing one task in one sector and being transferred to another task in another sector. This may expose not only options to keep employment up, but also challenges to ensure that the capabilities of the human resources are adapted to the new challenges in time to be applied. This completes what I had intended to say about applications of the UNFC to the UNRMS. There will be lots more to learn and develop in the time to come, but now let us turn to your questions and attempt to answer them, and if we are not able to do so in full, we will look at the chat and try to revert to you. So Harry, I suggest we now open for discussions and take a look at the questions that have come in the chat. And I see you have already answered some of them quite well.
Thank you, Per and Sigurd, for that excellent presentation. Now we have some time to take some questions. So some questions have already come in, so I'll request if you have any questions to please type into the chat window. So there is a question on whether UNFC in some ways share similarities with SPE PRMS. Sigurd or Per, can you answer it?
This is Per. Yeah, you will see similarities in the naming of the sub-projects. They are parallel. They are taking from the one that you have in UNFC is actually just mirroring the one you have in PRMS. But it's they are very close similarities. They are both have focus on project as the core, so they share the same the same strength of how to bring forward other information than just the quantities of a project. The PRMS, however, does not have this granularity which we show on the E-axis. This was quite well demonstrated when it was done the mapping between the PRMS and UNFC. It's if you go from PRMS to UNFC, you really sometimes need some additional information to go to different boxes, the different addresses. But going from one to many positions, but going back from UNFC, if you have the full inventory of your projects in UNFC, you go from a many to one position if you want to report back in the PRMS system. So, thank you.
Thank you, Per. This question on PRMS was from Abdaya. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. We have a question from Danilo. Can you please clarify class 334 definition? If I understood correctly, you are talking about improved recovery, but those are undiscovered resources. Sigurd or Per, can you answer it?
Sigurd, you take this. I cannot see here on this.
Yeah. Let me try. First of all, the E3 F3 are ill-defined projects, and the E3 F4 are the remaining quantities in place. I think what you mentioned, Per, is the F4 as the potential for enhanced recovery.
Yeah.
In 3 you have conceived projects, and the 334 is then prospects, that is potential projects, but the quantities have not yet been confirmed to be present. So that would be the system, basically, and the undiscovered is, of course, in petroleum and minerals, would be the exploratory stage, where the information is indirect, and in anthropogenic resources it may be quantities coming into the system, but that have not been confirmed or observed.
Thank you, Sigurd. There is a question from Enzo. What happens to projects that are technically feasible and mature, that is F1, and high recovery, high degree of confidence, that is G1 and G2, and they are in danger to lose license to operate or become standard assets? Would these part of the resources be in the uncolored boxes?
Yes. Yeah, it will.
They fall into E2 or E3.
Thank you, Sigurd and Per. Also, a follow-up question from Enzo is the light purple box related to production that is unused or used in internal consumption of the project. Is there a way to use this box to record wasted energy? For example, flaring and venting of in oil and gas operations. Sigurd?
Yeah, that would be captured in this position.
Let me expand. This is a very interesting question, pointing to these boxes, and we said maybe too little about them. there is in front of between the cube and the box, there is the reference point. And the reference point is the point where quantities are measured. So that would be the sales point, or the custody transfer point, or the point where waste production or consumption in operations is being measured or estimated, and it is that quantity which would define the quantities in the cube, basically, except for the source quantities. So the cube is about quantities that have the potential to be produced to one of those two reference points. And it is about recoverable quantities, except for the ones that are sources for the recoverable quantities. So this was an excellent question to allow us to elaborate on that. And fuel and flare clearly is coming out of the bottom door of the cube, and as are mine waste, and we don't want really to call it mine waste, as we mine basically the periodic table, and we would like to use all of it, but it is not part of the project that is reflected in the particular cube. It could be a resource for other projects.
Thank you, Sigurd. There is a question from Meta. Who would be responsible for classifying resources in UNFC? I think this question is related to the evaluator qualification. So can you take it, Sigurd or Per?
I'll be happy to try, Harry. It is the owner of the information who is responsible for the numbers being correct. And make no mistake, the requirements for making high quality estimates and getting the numbers right is extremely important here, as it is for other classifications and applications. The responsibility rests with the reporter, and the reporter will be the authorized organization, that is the company or the geological survey, the regulatory body reporting it, and it is that body which has the responsibility. So in a company, it would be the board of directors. They can delegate authority to the organization, but responsibility can never be delegated. And the delegation of responsibility can go to the teams in the organization, and they may include qualified persons, also often called competent persons, to develop aspects of the numbers or the full set of numbers. It's important to remember that in the UNFC and in society, in resource management for sustainable development, we are not really focused on quantities in place as classifications were in the early 1900s. We are focused on what the resources will bring to the society in forms of materials and services. And that is, of course, influenced by a number of other factors than the natural endowment. That is where the E-axis comes in. And the qualifications to evaluate that has to be in place, of course, and the reporter will, in reporting the right numbers, have to ensure that is all good.
Thank you, Sigurd. You have raised a very important point on how UNFC differs from other reporting codes. So the focal or pivot of the UNFC reporting is on various societal benefits, whether this project will bring socially and environmentally environmental benefits to the society. That is more important in UNFC reporting, and you have very nicely explained it. I have a question here, a follow-up question from Obaidea again. Sorry for not correctly pronouncing your name. Would I be right to say that UNRMS is an application phase of UNFC?
I think, Harry, you are the right person to answer that question.
Okay, I have already put it in the chat box. When we visualized UNRMS, which is still under development, we thought that there should be a way of classifying the resources, which is what UNFC does. And it says that at this point in time, if you take a snapshot of the resources, this is UNFC say this is where the resources will lie today. But if you have a vision into the future and you want to take the resources into a higher class, and as Sigurd said, what benefits it will provide to the society, then we should have a system to do that. And UNRMS is exactly doing that. And you are right, it is a kind of an application phase of UNFC. UNRMS is more dynamic. It is not just a snapshot of where resources are today, but it is a dynamic video which shows how resources could be moved across the higher classes, and it will reach the ultimate stage where it will be producing some benefits to the society. But in UNRMS, we are also putting a lot of emphasis on integrated and sustainable development. We had some discussion on flaring of gases, waste, which is coming from mining. Some of these are the major issues than the resources themselves. Earlier, we thought that resources are getting depleted, and then that is the biggest challenge we have. But today, we see that this waste and the so-called externalities that is coming from the projects are the limits to how a project could be developed. Social license to operate is a limit to resource development. So integrated and sustainable development will look into how we can change these challenges into opportunities. For example, mining waste really could be used as a resource elsewhere. Flared gases could be used locally in the operation or in the local community somewhere instead of just venting it out into the atmosphere. So similarly, we can have a use for everything which has got a problem or issue today. This heavy metals which are creating acid mine drainage could be recovered and used for useful purposes. Mine waters could be treated and made into liquid fertilizers that can supply fertilizers to agriculture and encourage and increase food production, etc. So this is a kind of food, water, energy nexus which we are also looking into UNRMS. So I will take the next question now. Let me. There was a question on how UNFC works with JORC, that is regarding the mineral projects. Sigurd or Per, can you take up that question very briefly? We explained it in terms of PRMS, but also in terms of CRISCO. If you can explain, that will be great.
There has been a mapping. There was done a mapping some 5-6 years ago between CRISCO and UNFC, and it turns out that there's quite good coherence between those classification. Of course, CRISCO classification does not have the granularity of the UNFC system, and also I think UNFC system is more directed to a holistic resource management, being a very powerful tool for governments, and and regional organization, while CRISCO is more for the business side, the businesses, as a tool for reporting to the stock exchanges. Maybe Sigurd, you could add on this.
Yes, you're right, Per, and thank you for that explanation. In the mature classes, of course, proved probable reserves, there is close alignment. Being a financial reporting tool, the CRISCO does not contain the upsides for the reserves. They are expected values or proved and probable reserves, basically, whereas the UNFC has the full range. And the reason for that is that the UNFC is also geared towards management, where the upside is extremely important to judge opportunities that might be captured. What is reported, of course, is another issue, and it is fully acceptable and open to use the UNFC to report only the G1 and the G2 quantities. When we then go to the F2s and the E2s, we will see that the JORC and CRISCO classifications are aggregated. They talk about measured resources, which of course reflects very much the tradition of classifying quantities that have been observed in place. We are not measuring future production. We are estimating it. And I think that the mineral sector is also interpreting the word measured as estimates of future production in that respect, and includes recovery factors. But it is not as granular as the UNFC in explaining whether the conditionalities are of the environmental, social, economic character, or whether they are of a technical project process character. They will be conditionalities, period, and they will be in one of those two sectors. Now, if you want to report numbers in terms of JORC from an inventory, from a UNFC inventory, as Per explained, that is easily done, because you will then aggregate several of the classes into the JORC classes. Going the other way, as I explained, you will need other information to distinguish whether you have problems in the environmental and social economic space or in the technical space.
Thank you, Sigurd. I'm just conscious of the time. We are just about in the hour, but I will take 1 or 2 minutes more to ask 1 or 2 questions. So we have a question from Lakshmi, which is also related. Do the UNFC and UNRMS guidelines proposes to meet the criteria of principles of responsible investment, that is incorporating ESG issues into investment practice? Quickly, Sigurd or Per, can you answer it?
This is for Sigurd, I think.
Yes, this is really an excellent question, and it goes to consideration of how approvals are being done, and you have basically, going from top to bottom, you have the way countries are organized with the legislative, jurisdictional and executive branches. Then you have the licenses that tie that to the industry, where you have contracts and license agreement that determines how decisions are being made, and you have the financial community that decides whether or not they can provide capital to the investments. Now those are three fora for decisions, and on top of that, you have secondary stakeholders, as I will call them. That is the lawmakers who then set the premises for the government, and you have tertiary stakeholders. Those are the electorates that determine who shall be the lawmakers, and in these spheres you will in a way determine what is acceptable investments and responsible investments, and of course all the considerations of the climate and the global constraints and so on come into that, and they come also from the UN and from the international community in the form of constraints, as we see for climate, 1.5 degrees, the SDGs, the carbon emission or the greenhouse gas constraints, and so on. The question is how to see the decision process to determine whether projects should proceed or not, and there can be a rigorous pattern, as I alluded to, or there can be a less rigorous pattern where, of course, the NGOs, the academia, the press, and so on elaborate on how this should be done, and that is equally useful and equally important.
Thank you, Sigurd. Again, I will request people, every participant, to bear with us for a few more minutes, so we will take a few questions. Devarajan, incidentally, was my senior in the university, has asked a question on, again, CRISCO. So are there any issues, conflicts in UNFC if it exists along with the CRISCO compliance system in the country's exploration mining domain? Sigurd or Pierre, can you quickly answer it, maybe in one minute?
I can say from the UN side and the UNFC side, there is no conflict. That is the CRISCO is part of the EGRM. They contribute to the UNFC, and as I mentioned, you can go from the UNFC to a CRISCO report without any difficulty. Now, there are occasionally, I would say, motherhood issues that the systems and the traditions and so on are built on one or the other, and this you encounter in all walks of life, and there are some of those, but from a purely rational point of view, there should be no unsurmountable difficulties going from the UNFC to the CRISCO. Another joke. Thank you.
Devarajan, maybe we can take up this discussion later on in detail, maybe next week or sometime later. We have a question from Enzo asking whether UNFC is a system that could be used only by the government or at a national level, but not so much for corporate or companies. Is that the case? Or what are the other key stakeholders for UNFC and UNRMS?
I can answer that. Sigurd showed a slide from a case study which was presented last year. It was the Norkalk study from Sweden. Norkalk is a private company, and they use the UNFC to get a better overview over the assets that they have. And they looked into different types of classification and found that the E-axis, the environmentally, socially, economically issues were so important to the company that they prefer to use the UNFC. And I think that was a very good statement to have. So, and we should also accept that there are some resistance or hesitance to go into new system if you already have a system, but I think as things evolve now with the issues a political focus on circular economy, etc., where the industry is very important, then I think the use and the need for UNFC will really take on. So this is going to unfold, I think, in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Per. Thank you, Sigurd. We are just 7 minutes over the time. I think we have answered most of the substantial questions. If a few questions on different topics were not answered, we are always available to you. You can email us the questions, and we can have a discussions later. I will put in the chat the email which you can use to ask the questions. Per, can I suggest you to move to the next slide, which...
yeah, Sigurd, take over here.
Sure, yeah.
Yes, this was a very short short conversation that relative to the massive issues that are at stake, and we have been reflecting on how we can continue the conversation in depth in some way, and we will explore with you, of course, also if you have interest, how to perhaps produce further conversations along the key theme, that is policy frameworks for the SDGs, allowing industry to deploy their best capabilities in ways that the capital market can finance. And the core subjects: UN and government framework conditions, industry dynamic capabilities, and capital markets. So if we are able to identify sponsors and interests and participating interests in participating and contributing, we'd be very pleased to explore a series of courses within this general scope. And with that, I think the next slide gives the reference to where all the details are found on the web. And the next slide is a thank you for your attention and for coming. I'm very pleased to see so many of you, and also so many that we have not related to before. It's a great pleasure to see your interest, and we really thank you for attending.
Yeah,
thank you. Per, one more slide. Yes, again, reminder that we will have a more detailed conversation on all these topics which we have discussed today at the UNECE Resource Management Week 2021. We will be closing the registration in few hours. So if any one of you want to participate in the sessions and has not registered, I will encourage you to go and register as soon as possible. With that, we will come to the end of this session. I would like to thank Sigurd and Per for their excellent presentation and taking up most of the questions. We may not have answered everything, but we still have time next week to look into some of the specific aspects you have raised. I will thank all of you, almost more than 150 people from different countries who have joined us today. This is not just an event of its own. We look forward for your continued collaboration with us in development of UNFC and UNRMS, as well as its deployment on the ground. So thank you all for being with us and being patient with the questions as well as the presentation. I look forward to seeing you all next week for our main sessions. For now, let me say goodbye to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks very much, Sigurd and Per and Harry. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry and Charlotte, for arranging it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That made it
Fabulous.
very good.